Hi, welcome to ALC. I'm Irene. I'm sure we've all heard the terms front wheel drive and rear wheel drive, but have not really put much thought into what they really mean or how they benefit us. So in this video, I'll be explaining what the front wheel drive and the rear wheel drive are, and comparing them through advantages and disadvantages, as well as throwing in the names of some cars with these drive lines. They are literally how they are called. In the front wheel drive, the front wheels receive power and drive the vehicle, while in the rear wheel drive, the rear wheels receive power and drive the vehicle. So how does all this happen? The engine sends power through the clutch if it's manual, or the torque converter if it's automatic, to the gearbox, be it automatic or manual. Please see my video on the clutch, the torque converter, the manual gearbox and the automatic gearbox to understand how all these things work. And also see my video on how the engine works to understand how the engine produces this power that it sends to these other components. In the front engine front wheel drive layout, the gearbox there is known as a transaxle. It's made up of a transmission, an axle and a differential. There are two drive shafts and they both go into the transaxle on both sides, and they both go to each front wheel. That is if it's a front engine front wheel drive car. This is the same layout used in some rear engine rear wheel drive cars. Sometimes we can also have front engine rear wheel drive cars that use transaxles. Cars such as the Ferrari F12 Berlinetta, the 612 Scaglietti, the 599 GTB Fiorano, the Mercedes-Benz SLS, Mercedes AMG GT, Aston Martin Rapide. Quite a lot of cars use that front engine rear wheel drive platform with the transaxle. But it's more of front engine and front wheel drive, or rear engine and rear wheel drive. And in the front engine rear wheel drive cars, the power flow is from the engine to the clutch or torque converter to the gearbox. Then a propeller shaft takes the power from the gearbox to the rear differential. There are two drive shafts as usual, and they both connect to each side of the rear differential and go into both rear wheels to drive the rear wheels. So now, like I just said, the front wheel drive is the front wheels that spin the vehicle, or that spin and propel the vehicle, while in the rear wheel drive, it's the rear wheels that spin and propel the vehicle. So please see my video on the differential to understand what the differential is and what exactly it does. Now that we know how the front and rear wheels get power, let's move into the advantages and disadvantages of both. I'll be starting with the advantages of the front wheel drive, comparing them with the disadvantages of the rear wheel drive to speed things up. As a result of the absence of other components such as the propeller shaft and rear differential, this makes the front wheel drive lighter, first advantage. This also leads us to the second advantage, that tells us that the front wheel drive is more fuel efficient than its rear wheel drive counterpart with the same engine and same displacement. The heavier a vehicle, the more power demanded from the engine and the more fuel the engine demands. So that affects the fuel efficiency. As most front wheel drive cars have their engines mounted transversely with the transaxle beside it and both being in front of the driver, this enables or permits front wheel drive cars to have shorter bonnets or a more compact bonnet if necessary, and also frees up space in the front compartment for the driver. Unlike the rear wheel drives that have their engines mounted longitudinally, and also depending on the number of cylinders, the bonnets are normally very long, as well as having the transmission eating into the front row, that is beside the driver and the front occupants, reducing cabin space for the front occupants, as well as narrowing down the footwell for the front passenger. Front wheel drive cars have a lower cost of production as well as increased assembly efficiency. Take for instance, in the assembly plant, to make a front wheel drive car, you have your engine, your transaxle, your suspension, your driveline, everything just in one. So manufacturers even just have all of them in one frame. So all you do is just bring your car body and put it on it, and they bolt the frame to the body, and that is it. Unlike the rear wheel drive that has the engine, the transmission, you have to fix in the propeller shaft, fixing the differential. This takes more time and is more expensive than this. So front wheel drive cars are normally cheaper than their rear wheel drive counterparts. Another advantage of the front wheel drive is the absence of the center hump. That hump found in the second row in between the two seats at the rear. So if you're carrying someone in the middle, that hump eats into the person's space. So the person has to spread his or her legs and put one part in the footwell of the right passenger and one in the left and right, regardless. But you understand what I'm saying? In older front wheel drive cars, the hump was actually really pronounced, and I used to wonder why is it there. but people claim it's because of the exhaust, which is a lame excuse. Now it's been phased out. In most modern front-wheel drive cars, we do not have that hump anymore, and even if it's there, it's really little, or it's so much less pronounced. Unlike the rear-wheel drive that has the hump there because of the propeller shaft and takes up a lot of space in the rear sitting compartment. During normal driving on snowy, sandy or loose surfaces, the engine in the front-wheel drive car puts weight on tires, and this helps or aids in traction between the tires and the road surface. Unlike a rear-wheel drive that has just the rear differential at the back, which isn't heavy enough to put enough weight on the rear tires to give it enough traction on such loose surfaces. This leads us to the disadvantages of front-wheel drive and advantages of rear-wheel drive. During heavy acceleration, the front of the car lifts and the rear squats. In the front-wheel drive, this lift results in the front tires losing traction between the tires and the road, and since the front wheel is the driving wheel, the loss of traction doesn't allow the front-wheel drive car to shoot off the line. Unlike a rear-wheel drive, which when the rear squats, it puts weight on the rear tires, and it allows the rear tires, which is the driving wheel in the rear-wheel drive, to transfer all the torque being sent to it directly to the road surface. This is what enables or allows the rear-wheel drive car to shoot off the line faster than a front-wheel drive car during heavy acceleration. The front wheel in the front-wheel drive car does the driving, the steering, and some of the braking. This is a lot of work for just one tire, and it causes the tire to wear faster than the rear wheels in that same car, because all the rear wheel does there is just move. Whereas in a rear-wheel drive car, the front wheels do the steering and some braking, while the rear wheel does the driving and some braking. And for that reason, both of them wear at around the same time. Also depends on how you drive and things like that. Another disadvantage of the front wheel drive is that its drive shaft, which is in front, tends to get damaged faster than the rear wheel drive's drive shaft, because the front wheel drive shaft has what is called a constant velocity joint. It allows the tires move in variable angles, steer, go up and down when going over bumps. So it tends to spoil faster than the rear wheel drive. That joint is called a constant velocity joint, or CV joint. That is the one in the front wheel drive. But with the rear wheel drive, it just goes into the rear tires straight from the rear differential. Although some cars have CV joints in the rear, but the rear tires don't move, they just go straight, apart from some cars now that have rear wheel steering. But the rear wheel steering doesn't make so much of an angle, it's just a little angle to help the car turn better, to reduce the turning radius. We'll get to that. In the rear wheel drive car, we have what is called a U-joint that connects the propeller shaft to the transmission, that's bringing the power from the transmission to the rear differential, and connects the rear differential to the propeller shaft as well. It allows for flex, it rotates and allows for up and down flex. When the car goes over uneven surfaces in front and at the rear, it allows for that flex and it rotates. But it doesn't move left, it doesn't go in variable angles, it doesn't go left or right, it just has two motions, rotating and up and down. Unlike the CV joints that allows the tires rotate, allows them steer, and allows them bounce. So the CV joint has a higher tendency to get damaged than the U joint, and that is the front wheel drive shaft gets damaged faster than the rear wheel drive shaft. Front wheel drive cars have a longer turning radius than a rear wheel drive counterpart with similar length and similar wheelbase. This is as a result of the drive shaft getting into the front wheels and other components in front that limits the front wheels from steering left or right. Unlike the rear wheel drive that doesn't have any drive shafts in front, so they have the space to turn at a wider angle. The turning circle or radius is the shortest distance it takes a car to turn around, like to make a U-turn from a specific spot, turn the steering and go around. That is the turning distance or turning radius. Rear wheel drive cars take a shorter distance to make a U-turn from a spot, unlike the front wheel drive car, because the rear wheel drive cars do not have components, drive shafts and all that in the front wheel hindering it from turning. Another disadvantage of the front wheel drive car is that it has less capacity to tow vehicles compared to its rear wheel drive counterpart. The distance between the front wheel, trying to tow something from the back, is farther than when it's a rear wheel drive trying to tow. So the rear wheel drive has more pulling power than the front wheel drive car. Front wheel drive cars with powerful engine are more likely to have torque steer. That is when under heavy acceleration, the steering tends to turn on its own without driver input. like the steering starts to pull to one side or the other because of the power coming from the engine. This is also as a result of the uneven length of drive shafts, because in the rear-wheel drive, the one closer to the transaxle is short while the one on the other end is longer. So that uneven drive shaft length causes torque steer, or allows torque steer to take place. Front-wheel drive cars have the tendency to understeer, while rear-wheel drive cars have the tendency to oversteer. Understeer and oversteer are vehicle dynamics, and I'll go deeper into them later on. So please see my video on understeer and oversteer, but for now I'll break it down simply. Understeer is simply when the vehicle turns less than the driver's input, while oversteer is simply when the vehicle turns more than the driver's input. Take this for example: when going on a straight line, speeding actually, and you try and turn into a corner. If it's a front-wheel drive car, as you start to turn, the front starts to slip, and due to the weight and moment of inertia, the vehicle wants to just keep going forward. So it just keeps going forward, and so you've turned more, but the body of the vehicle is not turning into the corner. It's just sliding away because the driving wheels, which is also the steering wheel, is not making enough contact with the floor because it's slipping, and that's what causes understeer. Whereas in a rear-wheel drive car, we have oversteer. When you turn into the corner, like while speeding on a straight line and you turn into a corner, the front wants to go into the corner, but the rear wheel, which is its driving wheel, starts to slip, and it slides the bomb out. So you turn into a corner, but because the rear tires are slipping and it slides the bomb out, you tend to want to make a spin. So that is oversteer, when the car turns more than the driver's input. Also, thanks to advancements in technology, we have the vehicle stability and traction programs that work and help correct understeer and oversteer when it's taking place in vehicles. Some drivers can control this oversteer with the use of braking, acceleration and counter steering. And with this, they can take the rear-wheel drive car into the corner in a fun and stylish way. This is simply known as drifting. So drifting is also oversteer. But when you want to drift, you have to turn off your ESP, VSC, DCS, whatever name the manufacturer of the car you're using calls the stability and traction control program. You have to turn it off if you want to drift. Did I remember to mention that you cannot drift or do donuts with front-wheel drive cars as one of its disadvantages? You can do power slides though, but nah, I'll pass. I'll stick to drifting. Drifting and fun takes place with the rear-wheel drive cars and all-wheel drive cars. More about that later. You would need some level of skill to be able to drift, and I advise you not to do it on public roads and uncontrolled environment. Examples of front-wheel drive cars are Toyota sedans like our Camry, Corolla, Yaris, most of the Toyota cars, most Honda cars, most Hyundai cars, most Kia cars. A lot of sedans are actually front-wheel drive cars. Even the Mercedes-Benz CLA is a front-wheel drive car, although the other sedans such as the C-Class, E-Class, S-Class are all rear-wheel drive cars. So switching back to the examples of rear-wheel drive, Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, but not all Mercedes-Benz and not all BMWs. I'm just giving examples of Mercedes-Benz C-Class, E-Class, S-Class are rear-wheel drive. The BMWs 3 Series, 4 Series, 5 Series, 6 Series, 7 Series, they're all rear-wheel drive cars. Also bear in mind that some front-wheel drive cars could also have all-wheel drive options, as well as some rear-wheel drive cars could also have all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive options. Examples are the Toyota Highlander has the front-wheel drive option or the all-wheel drive option. The Honda Pilot has the front-wheel drive option or the rear-wheel drive option. The Honda CR-V, same. Hyundai Tucson, Hyundai Santa Fe, Kia Sportage, all these cars are front-wheel drives will have the all-wheel drive options. See my video on all-wheel drive to understand all-wheel drive. Any Mercedes-Benz you see with 4MATIC is all-wheel drive, and any BMW you see with xDrive is all-wheel drive. Although some of those models have all rear-wheel drive options like C-Class and E-Class and S-Class, CLS as well. They have the rear-wheel drive option, but you can also opt for the 4MATIC, which is the all-wheel drive. There are so many other car companies that manufacture front-wheel drives and rear-wheel drive cars. I just mentioned the most common we have here. Even the Kia Optima, Hyundai Sonata, Kia Rio, Hyundai Ascent, Elantra, all those cars too are front-wheel drive cars. To know a front-wheel drive car, if you look at the front tires, you will see drive shafts going into the center of the wheel hub. But when you check the rear, you wouldn't see any drive shaft going into the rear.
This beam you are seeing here is not a drive shaft, it's just part of the suspension. It's known as a beam axle, and it's a dead axle because there's no power flow through it. And clearly there's no drive shaft going into the center of the rear tires.
And to know your rear wheel drive, you will see drive shafts going into the rear tires, the center of the rear tires.
This is a live axle because it allows power flow through it. It gets the power from the differential, that is that hump in the center, and there are drive shafts inside that are attached to the differential as well as each individual tire on both sides of the differential. And the power coming from the propeller shaft flows through the differential to both rear wheels. But you wouldn't see any
drive shaft going to the center of the front tires. And all-wheel drives have drive shafts going into all 4 tires, so also do 4-wheel drive cars. So please see my video on all-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive to understand what I'm talking about better.
If you stayed this far and enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Ayo Loves Cars, and please help me get more subscribers. Tell your friends about it, people that just want to know about cars. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so that you'll be informed whenever I post new videos, as well as follow me on other social media platforms. Thank you. See you in the next episode.